the election in Ohio in 2004, and Jill may talk about this a little bit, was overseen by Karl Rove's then IT guru, a man named Mike Connell. That's a fascinating story. I can't go into all of its details, other than to say that he set up a computer system, it's called Man in the Middle, that involved shunting all the real-time election returns in Ohio that night to a separate computer in a basement in Chattanooga, Tennessee, where those involved could stop the flow, manipulate the flow, change the numbers. It's the kind of trick that criminals of all kinds play, usually to steal money from banks and so on. Mike Connell set this up, all right? Then after a deposition that Bob was actually instrumental in making happen, and before he was supposed to be deposed again, Connell perished when his small plane crashed as he was on his way home to Akron from College Park. I'm only here to say that the contract that Connell signed with Ken Blackwell's office is publicly available. You can find it by going to my blog at markcrispinmiller.com. The actual contract that Connell signed with the Secretary of State's office, specifically a Christianist in that office named Monty Lobb. So that's just one piece of the countless pieces of hard evidence that we have that our elections have not gone way over to the right because of the will of the electorate, but rather because those elections have been manipulated to that end. Thank you.
Bob Fitrakis and I were involved in this because Bob is a professor at Columbus State University in Columbus, Ohio, and I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, and we witnessed in 2004 the theft of an election. It happened right before our eyes. It was done 100 different ways. We have published 5 books about this. Our latest is Will the GOP Steal America's 2012 Election? We know pretty much what they're going to do and how they're going to do it. As Mark mentioned, it boils down to 2 basic strategies. You disenfranchise as much of the public as you possibly can with a national Jim Crow strategy, and that has gotten some publicity, and then you swing the vote with electronic voting machines. That has still been responded to by the major media, the corporate media, with some hostility. Now we have immediate historical roots with this. It was done in 2000 in Florida, where electronic voting machines in Volusia County temporarily at least reversed between 16 and 20,000 votes and opened the door for the theft of that election in 2000 from Al Gore. But the public has not faced this. The government has not faced the reality that we are looking at the possibility in the dead of night at a very quick flip of this election, about which nothing can be done. There is no legal recourse. The courts have ruled that the software in these electronic voting machines, even if they're owned by the counties or the states in which they're being used, the software is proprietary to the companies that own them. We have no way to crack their code and to monitor these electronic voting machines. Bob Fitrakis and I at FreePress.org are trying to set up an on-the-ground monitoring system in Ohio to get at this as best we possibly can. But the public is going to have to face the reality that until we get universal voter registration, everybody must be, every citizen must be automatically registered at the age of 18. Until we get universal hand-counted paper ballots, where, and our advocacy is that we have Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday are national holidays where everybody can come out and vote. On Tuesday, all the students, all the high school and college students in the country come out, they run the polls and they count the votes. Everything has to be hand-counted, everything has to be paper ballot. I would point out that the country of Ireland has just thrown its electronic voting machines out and reverted back to hand-counted paper ballots. That's the case in Japan, in Germany, in Canada, and in Switzerland. We need to go to that system. Until we have universal hand-counted paper ballots and universal automatic citizen voter registration, we are not going to have guaranteed fair election and vote counting in this country. We must have hand-counted paper ballots. We must have universal voter registration. And the election of 2012, will be stolen, or at least bought. John Kennedy's father was a great exception when people said that Illinois was stolen in 1960. He said he paid for it fair and square. And the Romney family is going to be able, unless we are careful, unless we move now, we are very close to election day. Unless we move now, this election will be paid for fair and square by the Romney family and the other multi-billionaires who are supporting all these groups.
Now, why this is important is because of the fact that they have spent so much time saying that the United States elections, these 900 cities and major states and municipalities that are using them, is because of the fact that they are ran by a Spanish corporation. And the reality, folks, is from here forward, we're going to be talking about the fact that our American elections are no longer ran by the United States of America, which is something that we've got to fix. And why, and when we were looking at them, we knew going in, and this was not one I had learned, SCADA was not one I had learned, but we knew this was the location from our source at SmartTech that the man in the middle might be located at. And so when we got to those locations, we were like, oh, we found a house, and we found an office building that nobody's in that's a virtual office. Our elections are being ran in Spain. So that's the first portion of it. But additionally, part of my tip involved the MOVE Act. And basically, that gives these guys access to the central tabulators. And so Jim's going to explain that, and I'll let him explain that, and then I'll go back through a few minutes.
It's really simple, folks. There was a new federal law passed in 2009 called the MOVE Act, Military Overseas Voter Enhancement. What it was supposed to do is streamline the process for the people overseas voting into the U.S. And by the way, the foreign consulates, foreign contractors, U.S. citizens overseas and military are all lumped together in the same process. Most people don't know that. The new process under the MOVE Act says that those voters have to be given a choice to register to vote electronically and actually vote electronically over the internet. Okay? There were no security standards set up in the MOVE Act. It was patterned after the Help America Vote Act of 2002, in which, same deal, the federal government was going to supply new money for new computers to support these laws. But in the case of the MOVE Act, money was being supplied by the feds, but there were no security provisions even talked about in the MOVE Act, unlike the previous Help America Vote Act. Last time the feds gave counties money for voting, they gave them security standards they had to follow. In the MOVE Act, not only were there no security standards, but the states and counties were not allowed to enact security requirements stronger than the feds. So the feds said you have to allow these guys to vote over the internet. And you can't set up security provisions that says, wait a minute, that's potentially a problem. Several companies moved into the area of MOVE Act software, but by far the biggest player was Skytle, however you pronounce their name, in combination with ES&S. They have formed a partnership in ES&S and Skytle, but Skytle was the main software developers. ES&S apparently did some US support functions. That software has to be able to write votes into the central tabulator and has to be able to write new voter registrations into the voter registration database. So not only can it affect the votes for the overseas military and standard citizen overseas voters, it can in theory affect, or I almost want to say the word infect, the rest of the election process in each county where this kind of software is used. Now, there are some states, such as Wyoming, that are in revolt and are saying, no, we're not playing along. And guess what? Mitt Romney's campaign is now suing them for their lack of compliance with this setup. Yeah.
Joe, can I ask you a question? Are you saying that having done the man in the middle in Ohio in 2004, they're now in a position to do the same thing in several other states?
We're saying that the best location, it was the house in the middle, which would show.
I want to know specifically what state election returns we're now supposed to worry about because of this practice. In other words, it was
900 different cities is going through.
Cities and counties. We
And
don't
consider.
know how many counties are fully compliant with the MOVE Act and have uncertified software straight tied to their central.
About 25% of the counties in the country.
It's about
All
25%.
counties, they have access.
That sounds about right.
why do we know these truths and why does the media never report it? All right? So basically what it is you have to follow the money. And I could say it in a soundbite for you guys. All right, if I'm a politician and I want you to vote and I want you to write me a nice check for my campaign, I don't want to look at the election fraud because you're not going to write me a big check. All right? Okay? And if I'm a television and media station and I want to get all that good money from the Republican and Democratic parties and I want to get it from various advertisers who love to support the elections, I don't want to show that there's any kind of fraud because the parties may really object and I may not get their money either. Okay? And then if I'm a Secretary of State and let's start. If I'm an exit poller and I'm hired by the media to come up with the election results so that all of the Americans can be satisfied with the next day of the results, and, it got dissed in 2004 because we were showing some different results than what ended up showing on the vote totals. Well, I don't want to discuss or show my raw data, and I want to keep on being hired. All right? So now I adjust my vote total, my raw data, my exit polls to fit the vote totals. And this country is the only country in which exit polls are not considered a gold standard of election integrity. And we are reduced to simple things like going out and videoing the vote between 10 and 12 midnight to see if we can get some precinct totals.
One thing I think we should come away with from this event is the imperative of getting hold of the latest Harper's, where there's an absolutely killer cover story by Victoria Collier, who's like the rest of us, been devoting her life to this cause. This is the best overview I've ever seen of the risk of election fraud, not voter disenfranchisement, not the need for stricter controls on campaign contributions. No, election fraud. She talks about how the polling has been skewed. She talks about how exit poll results are always now adjusted to fit the official outcome, which is preposterous, and yet it's done time and time again. She talks about the dubious ownership of the voting machine companies. She talks about the red shift that takes place in election after election after election. The red shift means that there is a sudden, unaccountable divergence between the official outcome and the exit poll results, and it always benefits one party. Always, time and time again. This is statistically impossible. Couldn't happen on its own. This is a piece that you must get. Harper's and Rolling Stone have been the only major magazines in the United States to pay attention to this subject. So, we definitely have to push for viable solutions, like Lori's. This is crucial. We have to come up with alternatives to the system that we have. It is essential that we get rid of computerized voting across the board and follow the leads of Ireland and the Netherlands and Germany, which did that. We have to forbid the participation of all private companies in the election process. This is not something that should be privatized, right? And then we should get rid of the Electoral College, and we should expand election day and have automatic registration. All these things have to happen. But first of all, we have to face the fact that we don't live in a democracy now, that our elections are a disgrace. And this is something that the press has to discuss and the Democratic Party has to face.
We won a federal lawsuit in Ohio in the wake of the 2004 election, requiring by federal law the preservation of all the election records in the 88 counties in Ohio in the wake of that election, so that we could actually do a recount and see what would prove definitively what we were talking about. Because we watched at least 100 different methods that were used by the Republican Secretary of State in Ohio, J. Kenneth Blackwell, who was simultaneously serving as the co-chair of the campaign to re-elect Bush Cheney. The man in Ohio in 2004 who was in charge of the election was simultaneously in charge of re-electing George W. Bush. We won a federal lawsuit requiring the preservation of all the documents. We then had a Democratic Secretary of State who came in after Blackwell, Jennifer Bruner. She set aside an archive in Columbus to receive all these documents, and when she went to get them, she discovered that the documents documenting the 2004 presidential election in Ohio in 56 of the 88 counties had been destroyed, in direct contradiction of a federal injunction. This is the kind of situation that we are up against. Jesse Jackson has said it beautifully, twice, two quotes from Jesse Jackson. He said, we can afford to lose an election, but we can't afford to lose our democracy. And we cannot have public elections conducted on private voting machines. This is the death of our democracy.
But what you gotta understand is they're gonna be, and that's the reason I'm holding my iPad, this year, the way we understand they're gonna be operating, they're gonna be like in Ohio with their iPad, and maybe the Democrats will have a piece of paper unless they go buy iPads after hearing this. And they're gonna be typing in everybody who registers. So they will know who's voting. Now, what is significant about that is they're, signing in, because as y'all know, you sign in when you vote. And what's interesting about that, and what's so scary about that, is at 5 o'clock in the day, they will know everybody who's not voted, but who is registered. And so when they have access to central tabulators, like through the MOVE Act, because that act was written in a fashion in which there has been no certification or security put in to that guy I showed you that was skittled, then they can say, well, in these states, this is who voted. And these are the people who are registered that didn't vote. And that's where those votes come into play. And that is a real concern. And so, do we really, as American citizens, want somebody there at the election site as we are signing up saying, at 3:30 in the afternoon, Jill Simpson was here? It's something really to think about. That's an individual selling it to a private data firm that can sell it to any place in the world. And do we really want people to know who votes and who doesn't? And obviously there's written reports, but it's entirely different when you think about the speed of the internet and the fact that in 2 hours they could figure out all the people, or an hour or 10 minutes, who did not vote, and those people could potentially vote. But if you start looking at this whole situation, we basically have one guy bouncing around to almost every company, and they're being operated outside of the United States. And what I hope to see is that our government takes over the elections and kicks out the privateers. We're a great country. Why should we have private corporations handling our elections?
And Bob, early on, the early reports were that a lot of the software was first thought of by a group called the CIA. And this had come out during the 70s, during the famed Church Committee and others that talked about benign operations. Those of you who remember your history, there were these bloody, vicious coups, the most famous in Indonesia, where 800,000 ethnic Chinese died. And benign operations, Duarte in El Salvador, where I went after the election, was you rigged the election so you didn't have to kill anybody, right? It was a benign, friendly operation.
My view is, I'm a little hot-headed, my view is that people should be directing their protests at the media. There should be 1,000 people jamming the doorway of the New York Times building and insisting that they pay attention to this stuff, because the media is the problem here, right? That should be the focus of people's protests over the way this whole thing is covered, right? And people should also consider, this is my idea and I don't recommend it. I don't recommend it at all, okay? People should be bringing crowbars to the polls, okay? Because I don't recommend that. They should bring, because the time has come to crowbars. These machines are an impediment to democracy. They are a means of subverting democracy. We need hand-counted paper ballots.
Now, the pattern we're seeing, and you can watch for it on election night, is that the vote counts will come in, and it will be in the key states, and we'll get certain results. And I believe it may well show that Obama has won the election, more or less. And then you will start to see around midnight deep in the deep night, at 11 o'clock, after 11 p.m. and up to about 3 a.m. in the morning, you will hear about glitches in the vote count. And this is what happened in Ohio. At 12:20 at night, a screen was shown on CNN that showed that John Kerry had very substantially won the election, and especially in 9 of the 11 swing states. And when, by 2 a.m., and then there were all sorts of problems with the vote count, of the electronic tallying. And by 2 in the morning, 4 of the swing states, Iowa, New Mexico, Nevada, and most importantly, Ohio, had done the red shift. We call them now the purple states. They were blue at midnight, and they were red at 2 in the morning. And to this day, nobody from the Democratic Party, not John Kerry, not Al Gore, has challenged or has done a definitive study of what has gone on and what went on in 2000, or especially
He's
2004.
got that $7 million banked.
John Kerry had a fund, a $7 million fund that was specifically earmarked to have legal teams make sure that the election in 2004 was stolen. And the only money that we know was spent was to hire the Republican law firm, the Taft law firm in Cincinnati, that put a lawyer out, an attorney named Hoffheimer, to attack Bob and I for breaking these stories. So what Mark has said, this is, as a historian, it is staggering that there has been no historians even have come in and done, that I know of, have done major studies, ground level studies to see what happened in Ohio 2004. It's a staggering story. We think there's a high likelihood that of these 9 states with Republican governors and secretaries of state, there's ample funding and ample technology to flip the key states as needed. And we think it is very high likelihood it will happen. And this will be devastating to our democracy. It'll be the third of the last 4 presidential elections stolen. And we have to make sure this doesn't happen.
So my name is Eric Lazarus, and I'm the author of The Machinery of Democracy, Protecting Elections in an Electronic World. One question I wanted to ask is, I come from the belief, after studying this for several years, that no matter, this technology is so insecure that even if I owned an election system vendor, someone could still get in and steal the election underneath me. It's that bad. I couldn't even, this stuff is so insecure that even if you bought an election system vendor, you could still have the election restolen underneath you. It's that bad. And by the way, even true of an open source voting system, that unless we invent something really clever, fundamentally different, they could also be subverted. So it's only due to procedures and odds that we will ever have an election system, at least in the foreseeable future, that could be trustworthy. So as much as having a national voting system based on open source software, would be good for a lot of reasons, it still doesn't give you a trustworthy election. Does anyone disagree with that idea? I mean,
No. There needs to be strategic lawsuits, but those lawsuits have to be directed at establishing fundamental civil rights. We have to have a civil right to genuinely fair elections and a civil right to do oversight. Right now, the whole right to oversight is drastically limited by electronic voting, but you also have some states where the right to oversight is connected to right of the people. Some states it's the right of the candidate. Some states it's the right of the parties. Now it has to be a right of the people. And it has to be a right that can be held by non-technical people. And that excludes various cryptographic fixes and things of that nature. If we don't start from a standpoint of basic civil rights, look, I'm also a member of the board of directors, Southern Arizona chapter, ACLU. So I'm since first this year. So I've had to think, I'm not here representing ACLU, but I have to think there about basic civil rights. And that conversation has not come up near enough in the area of electronic voting, of voting in general regardless. We've got to go back to basics.
Also, so you know, other countries who have been voting with these machines have now come along and said, these are junk. And one of the countries, I think is Ireland, and they have thrown away the machines. So hopefully we're going to see all across the world, because these same companies, American companies or foreign companies that have bought out American companies now at this point, they have now been recognized in other countries that are using them as just being boxes that aren't worth a piece of